When you don't have dies or an e-cutter, but you want to cut out an image, it's time to pick up your paper snips and fussy cut. It may not be your favorite, but if you have a plan going into it, you're more likely to have success and maybe not mind it so much. Every technique video is narrated live while I'm doing the technique, so you're getting a real-time view of how the whole process works. Pull out the supplies I'm using and create right along with me, pausing as you need. Before we get started, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel. I appreciate it. I've been stamping long enough that I remember that the only way to cut out images before dies and before die cutting machines was to fussy cut. So I've been fussy cutting for a long time. I know it may not be your favorite, but there are occasions when you want to fussy cut an image. Like, for instance, this sentiment here. It does not come with a die set, but I like to cut out the word amazing. So I like to cut that out. And then I also have a few images here that, while these do come with dies, perhaps I don't have them, or perhaps I want to cut right up against the edge. So there are reasons why you may want to fussy cut outside of having the dies for the images. So let's take a closer look and I'll give you a few tips. My first tip for fussy cutting is to make sure you have a really good pair of paper snips that you only use for paper. Don't use it for ribbon or anything else like that. Just use these for paper. And if they happen to be gummy because you cut something that had adhesive on it or whatever, just take your adhesive remover eraser here and just clean off the blades. This is going to help make your cutting that much easier. And besides, you want to have clean blades anyway, whether you're fussy cutting or not. So just a little bit of a swipe on there will get rid of any excess adhesive that you might have on your blades. And then you should be good to go. They should be nice and clean on the inside and ready to go. Plus, they should cut really well. So make sure that your blade is cutting really nice, that you don't have any hitches or anything in them. All right, so good scissors is always key number one. The second is deciding how you want to cut out your image. So for a sentiment like this, typically you would cut it out with a border around it instead of trying to cut right up against the line. So there's a couple of ways you can get that border. Of course, you're going to need a pencil. So grab a pencil and grab your stamp. The stamp will give you some clues as to what would look nice when you are creating your outline. And you may even want to try putting it over the image. So just line that right back up, press it down firmly so that it doesn't move around because it's going to want to move. And you can try to outline it. Now you're going to have to be really gentle with this and you may not get the best results. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. You may get a good outline. All right, so this is one way that you can try that. The other way to do that is to just simply freehand an outline. So let me zoom in even closer for you. There we go, super close. And as you can see, as I was going around the stamp, it was kind of far away. So perhaps I wanted something a little closer. So going around my stamp wasn't really going to work in this case. So again, I'm just going to take my pencil and very lightly follow the image around. This is really the best way to make sure that you get an even cut and that your shadow is even. Now you have to decide if you're going to bother coming all the way up here or not. And the way that I usually decide that is that if my pencil line is going to come up here, but then it's not really going to move away from that line, like there's going to be even space on both sides, but I'm not going to have anywhere to cut out, then I'm not going to cut that. I'm just going to bypass it and come around the Z here and trace around. Now you can see I'm not doing like one solid line. I'm just sketching it in. It doesn't need to be perfect. If you see lines later, it's pencil, you've done it lightly, you can erase it. This is totally worth doing, especially if you don't fussy cut often, because it will keep you from having a thicker line on one side and then getting closer and closer and getting thinner and thinner, and then having to keep going around and around and around and around until all of a sudden you're cutting right up against the line of the ink. So making a line with a pencil ahead of time is really worth it. You can follow all of those ins and outs, make it look nice and soft. Now here you have to decide if you're going to keep the dot for the eye. And if you are, you're just going to come right up over it. Maybe give it a little bit of a circle. come back down, and come through. Now here, again, you need to decide if you're going to keep the simply or if you're going to just cut out the word amazing. If you're just going to cut out the word, then of course we're going to ignore the rest of that and continue on until we hit the end of the road. And we join up with where we started. All right, so now I can just go ahead and cut this out, and we'll talk about cutting in a minute. So let's take a look at these other stamps. So here we've got some flowers, and it's the same thing. If you want to, say we want to cut out this flower and we want it to have a little bit of a shadow around it, just like you would if you were die cutting it, I recommend that you do a pencil line, not freehand it. So that way you've got a nice even look. You can make adjustments with your pencil line ahead of time, and then you can cut it out. So we've got this one here, and we would go all the way around. The same thing with these leaves. There are a lot of little indents here. When you look at a die, it's not going to necessarily come in and cut out all these little indents. It's going to skirt around them. So when you're making your line, do the same. Skirt around this whole little area. And even in here too, if I bring this line in, it's going to be even on both sides and there's not going to be anything cut out. So I'm just going to skip it. And then come down here and give my little stem enough space all the way around. And then finish up my line here. There. So now I've got a line that I can go ahead and use my scissors to cut out. All right, so the actual cutting process is more about moving with one hand and controlling your scissors with the other hand. So even though I'm left-handed, I cut right-handed, so that's what I have going on here. I'm going to be moving my left hand around a lot, and I'm not going to be moving my right hand. I want to get the paper as far down into the throat of the scissors and not use the snippy ends. All right, so if you're cutting little snips, you're going to end up with little jagged lines and that kind of thing. You want to take big throaty cuts and snip like this as much as you can. That's going to give you the most control over your cutting. So let's take a look at how this works. So like I said, I'm moving the paper with one hand and cutting with the other. So my right hand is not going to move once I get it in place. I've got my line here. Now I'm going to start moving the paper. You see how my scissors aren't moving hardly at all? I'm using the paper to match up the line with the throat of the scissors. And as I get to about halfway in the scissor, I'm actually opening it up again and getting back deep into the throat there. So I'm never really getting down to the tip edge of the scissor. And you see I've got a little bit of resistance here. That's because this little bottom flap is in a bad place. So at some point I may want to stop and snip off this little excess here. That's the only time I'm going to come down to the tip because I want this edge to just get cut off. So working with a free amount, a free space on your cutting side is very helpful because it just keeps everything nice and free flowing, and you won't run into any resistance. So as you come to a hard turn, like a hard left or a hard right, you're just going to keep turning the paper. And while you're turning the paper, you're not really cutting at all. So you're just keeping your scissor in place, turning your paper, and then you can continue on. When I do that, then I, again, will bring back my scissors so I get back into the throat and continue along my line. So that's basically how it goes. Again, I've got a nice turn here. So again, I'm going to turn the paper, not moving my scissor until I can see the line again and continue around. You want to always be able to see the line as much as possible. There are times when the line will be on the back side of your scissor, and you don't necessarily want that to happen. You can't see very well, so you might be kind of guessing where you're cutting. You want to try to keep that line in view as much as possible. So here I'm coming up on just like this little tiny spot. It's going to be another big turn. So I'm going for the turn. I'm trying to be able to see that line. And now again, I can cut and make it around the corner. So whether you're cutting out a word or you're cutting out an image, this is how you're going to do it. This is a great place to just cut off the end. We don't need that piece anymore. And again, I can cut off the end here. Don't need that piece. And I can finish my cutting. Now there's less to hold on to. As there's less to hold on to, just need to take it slow, continue going at a pretty consistent pace. You don't need to be rushing through this kind of thing. The slower, more methodical you can go, keeping your blade, keeping the paper back in the blade, way down in the throat here, the better off you're going to be. So keeping the paper back in the throat also keeps you from accidentally cutting your piece in half. So as I'm coming around the eye here, this is an opportunity for me to whoops and cut all the way across, but because I'm back in the throat, I'm not gonna be able to do that as well. I feel like I have more control, so I shouldn't have any problem trying to cut around all of that. It's okay if your paper curls a little bit as you're doing this. You're going to be able to straighten that out when you're all done. So if you've ever watched somebody do fussy cutting on a process video or anything like that, chances are they've not shown you how long it takes them to actually fussy cut. They may have sped it up or they may have skipped parts of it. This is how long it takes to fussy cut. And there we go. Now that I've got my word all cut out, it looks pretty good. If I want to come back and fix any little spots, I can do that. Again, I'm going to go way back into the throat of the scissor and fix up any little edges that I may have missed or that I want to fix up. And then I can take an eraser and erase off any pencil lines that are left. Now, if you're going to cut directly on the line, the first thing I recommend you do is that if it is a larger piece that you're going to be cutting out, just cut out the piece that you need from the larger piece. So always work with the smallest piece that you can. Now, when you're working right on the line, there's no need to do any kind of pencil lines. So just keep your scissors on the outside of the line and follow the same principles. Move the paper, not your scissors, as many times as it takes to go in and out. And if you leave a little bit of white behind, that's okay. We'll be able to fix this in a minute. Now for something like this flower where I've got all these little sharp edges, I like to just go ahead and finish off each edge separately. So as I come to the end, I just cut it all the way off and move on to the next little point. That will allow you to always see the line, and then you won't ever be running into any paper as you go. Working on a little flower like this is actually really good practice because it gets you used to moving the paper without moving the scissors. And especially on those 90-degree turns here, or 180-degree turns at the bottom of the flower. It's really good practice. So once you've perfected that, then cutting out anything else is really quite simple. This is another really great technique. So if you've got a layered flower like this and you want to layer the flower, but you don't have dies to cut, say, this inner flower, you could just fussy cut the inner flower and pop it up on another stamped image below it and get some really great dimension very easily. And the nice thing about fussy cutting like this right on the line is that it looks uninterrupted. So you don't have that little white outline or colored outline. That's different than the flower that you have colored. Looks really nice that way. So once you've got your piece cut here, if you want to avoid those little white edges that you might see, just grab yourself a Sharpie marker or some other dark colored marker that matches your ink and go around the edges. It makes a really big difference. It will help hide any imperfections of the lines that you may have cut. And it also keeps that white from really showing. Makes it look like a really nice finished element. So like say right here, there's that extra white. If I go around it with the Sharpie and it grabs that color, you see how it just kind of melts right in and it looks so much better. You can tell already this side has been colored in and this side is not. It looks 110% better. So you've got those dark edges. It just looks really great that way. So there you go, some tips and tricks in how to fussy cut images when you don't have dies. I hope you enjoyed this technique and you add it into your toolbox sometime soon. When you give it a try, share it out on Instagram and tag me at @NicoleWatt_Creates. I always love to see what your creative mind is thinking. Thank you so much for spending a little time with me today. And until next time, happy crafting.